Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for the third webinar in the ROS Data Dashboard series. And today we'll be focusing on advanced performance metrics and data quality. So you may remember some of us from the previous webinars, but by way of introduction, you just met Lauren from Apt Associates, who's going to keep everything running smoothly today. And Jennifer, also from Apt, will be helping with Q&A and polls. And I am Nathan from Apt. Let's get started. Our plan for today is to start by reviewing the basic purpose of the data dashboard. And then we'll jump into advanced data quality and advanced performance metrics. We'll have some time at the end for question and answer, but you are also welcome to submit questions at any time throughout the presentation using the Q&A feature down towards the bottom right to ask a question. We'll be taking a few breaks throughout to answer questions as much as we have time for, and then we'll return to more at the end. I want to note that today's webinar is intended for anyone who has seen the first two data dashboard webinars already and has some familiarity with the dashboard. This is not exactly an intro level webinar. We'll be building on the foundation that we set with the first two webinars before. So if you haven't had a chance to see those yet, we really encourage you to take a look at the recordings on the HUD Exchange for some background information that will help contextualize everything that we're going to talk about today. All right. So let's review the purpose of the data dashboard. Essentially, the data dashboard visualizes the data that ROS grantees like you submit to HUD every year. It shows you how your program is performing based on that data. The goal of the dashboard is to help ROS grantees and the people they serve. Specifically, you can see the reach and the progress of your ROS work in a way that's focused on program priorities like services provided and participant outcomes. You can also compare your program's activities and outcomes to those of similar grantees. You can identify where and how you can strengthen your program's performance, including how to better reach participants with more services, how to improve participant outcomes, and how better data submissions can more accurately reflect your performance. The data in the dashboard comes from your annual reports already submitted each year to HUD. There's no new data collection or submission that's required for your data to be included in the dashboard. Let's take a closer look, though, at how your ROS data gets to the dashboard. HUD expects grantees to collect data continually throughout the year. One way to do this is with the Inform tool, which we're now referring to as OLDC. That's made by a group called Grant Solutions, and it's available to all grantees for free. Another way to do this is with third-party case management software, which is available for purchase. We'll talk more about tracking data continually using the OLDC tool in a few minutes. Even though data is collected continually, we split it into one-year periods for reporting purposes. Reporting periods go from October 1st to September 30th every year. Grantees submit their data to HUD once a year by October 30th, 1 month after the reporting period ends. If you use the OLDC tool to collect your data, then you submit your report from within the tool. If you use case management software like Ask Online or Family Metrics, then your data will be submitted for you. If you use other case management software, it may generate an Excel file for you to upload to OLDC. After the submission deadline, HUD reviews grantees' reports. They're looking for problems like missing reports and residents' personally identifiable information, which should never be submitted. How long this step takes depends on how many problems are found. After HUD finishes reviewing the data, Grant Solutions, that's the group that maintains the OLDC tool, makes a copy of the data for us to load into the dashboard. This process usually takes about 1 to 3 months, depending on Grant Solutions. Grantees are notified on the ROS mailing list when a new reporting period is available in the dashboard. If you haven't registered for HUD's ROS mailing list yet, be sure to do so because it's used for all sorts of important announcements. We're very happy to share that as of today, the most recent 2020 data is now available in the dashboard. Note that the schedule on this slide reflects the most recent dashboard update that we completed. But we know that you want to see your data in the dashboard as soon as possible, so we're working on ways to streamline that in future years. We've also heard from grantees that it would be helpful to have the option to add new data to the dashboard multiple times per year. We love that energy, and that's something that we're looking into for the future as a voluntary option for grantees who are interested. This goes hand in hand with collecting data throughout the year, not just at the end of the reporting period, which we'll revisit in a few minutes. I'll pause here and take any questions on what we've covered so far. Feel free to ask anything at any point using the WebEx Q&A tool. Jennifer, have you seen any questions yet?
No questions yet, Nathan.
All right, well, feel free to ask anything as it comes up throughout the presentation. So before we dive into data quality, we want to hear from you. How have you been using the data dashboard so far? We'll start really open-ended with this poll. So Lauren, if you could enable the chat to panelists, what we're going to ask you to do is open the chat using that little speech bubble button towards the bottom right, type a message to all panelists, and press enter to share how you've used the data dashboard so far. Jennifer is going to choose a few answers to share with everyone, and this is anonymous. We won't share your name or anything like that, just what your answer was. That open for a few minutes and take your time.
Okay, Nathan, we have a couple responses coming in to our question, how have you used the data dashboard so far? One person reports they've used it to review my program performance with others. Another response is my grant does not show in the drop-down menu. I tried to put in my grant number as well, so we'll discuss that.
Yeah.
Someone else has used it to look at areas in which they need to improve. Folks are also using it to compare their information to others so far. I see one response about verifying if the report was submitted. Another person is using it to compare data to the previous year and try to find ways to improve data quality. There's others who say they have not yet gotten a chance to use it yet. And someone else is again saying that they're using it to see what areas where they need to improve.
Great. That is good to hear. I will speak to the issue of not having found your grant in the drop-down menu. That is possible either if no reports have been submitted, or if you just submitted your first report for 2020, then that wouldn't have been available until today. So take another look, see if it might have made it in this most recent update, and feel free to shoot us an email if that's not appearing. I also saw a question about OLDC, and we'll talk about this a couple of times, but OLDC stands for Online Data Collection, and this is the new name for what used to be called the Inform tool. All right, Lauren, I think we can close the chat. I've gotten a lot out of reading what everyone has been using the dashboard for, and I hope that today we can spark some ideas for how we might even be able to go deeper than what we've seen so far. All right, and thank you everyone for sharing. Next, let's move on to the advanced data quality improvements that we have to share with you today. We're going to start by reviewing some general best practices. We're going to talk about the important distinction between participants and non-participants. We're going to talk about how to record frequent services. And similarly, we'll talk about tracking data continually. And then we'll share a heads up about some upcoming data elements that will be added to OLDC shortly. Since we're focusing on advanced data quality today, we aren't going to spend a lot of time reviewing basics of how to check your data quality in the dashboard or how to use the ROS data guide. But if you aren't already familiar, we encourage you to watch the recordings of the previous webinars and to check out the other resources that we'll share in a few minutes. We'll start with best practices. And these are some general guidelines that you can follow to increase your data quality. You might remember these from the previous webinar, but we think that they're worth reiterating. First of all, leaving something blank will always lower your data availability score. That's because blank data elements don't help HUD differentiate between what you know and what you don't know. If you know that nothing happened for a particular data element, for example, you know that a participant did not receive a particular service or did not earn any income, then report that. We'll talk more about how to do that in a moment. Of course, if you don't know whether something happened or not, then be honest about that. That's the time when you should select information not collected. But the easiest way to increase your data quality is to explicitly report when you know something didn't happen. It's also really helpful to follow up directly with service providers who you have referred participants to so that you can find out if the service was actually provided and then report that information. Broadly speaking, after looking at the dashboard and the data guide, we encourage you to make a plan for the data quality improvements you want to make and stick with that plan. That's the best way to get more green circles on that data availability page in the dashboard. Now, let's go through a quick example of a data element and how to improve its quality in your reports. Here we have job development service. If we take a look at the top right, we see job development is contacting an employer directly for the purpose of obtaining possible employment for a specific individual. The first question to ask here is whether you're providing this service or connecting participants with a service provider and perhaps not recording it, or maybe recording it someplace else. Let's take a look at the comments column on the right again. Job development services may be counted if it was provided by the ROS service coordinator, a partner, or service provider. So maybe a provider that you work with is contacting employers on your participant's behalf, but you aren't capturing or recording when that happens. The most helpful improvement then might be to work with that provider to develop an arrangement where they send you information on a regular basis about the job development services they've provided to your participants so that you can report on it and track that program's progress using the dashboard. Second question here is whether you're reporting what you know, even when you know that nothing happened. Let's zoom in on those items in the response options column. If you leave an element blank, it will always reduce your data availability score. And similarly, if you select 77, information not collected, it will also reduce your data availability. That's because this option is designed to be selected when you aren't sure whether something happened or not. So if you connected a participant with your partner, but you haven't been able to find out whether the partner provided job development services or not, then information not collected is the correct element to select. But if you followed up with your partner and you know that job development was not actually provided, you can select 3, not applicable, and that will increase your data availability score. And of course, if you know that job development was provided, then you can select 1, yes, and that will also increase your data availability. This is true of pretty much every service. Leaving it blank or selecting information not collected will reduce your score, but selecting yes or NA will increase it. Let's move now to the important differences between participants and non-participants. As you probably know, the overview page in the dashboard will show you the number of participants and non-participants in your data, as you can see in the example at the top right. The key difference here is that participants receive needs assessments and services, but non-participants receive only services. Now, your goals as a service coordinator will be slightly different for participants and non-participants too. Your goals for participants are to achieve the ROS key performance indicators. But your goal for non-participants primarily as a first step is to convert them into participants by providing them with that intake needs assessment, which allows them to become a full participant in the ROS program. In the dashboard, this is drawn from the participant status data element, which you can learn more about in the ROS data guide. Next data quality improvement relates to recording frequent services. We know that a lot of services are provided regularly or multiple times to the same participant. We strongly encourage grantees to report each confirmed service event using the number of times data elements that accompany the service data elements. This is important because it can show HUD your program reach and the progress that you're making towards the ROS key performance indicators. It also gives you a lot more nuance when you're tracking your own growth over time, because instead of just looking at whether a service was provided, you can look at how often or how many times. The goal here is really to be as accurate as possible. HUD's hope is to better understand how often participants need services in a particular area and how often grantees provide them. And the more information you report about that, the better. That said, though, we realize it might not be possible to get every referral or every service element for each participant. To help with that, we recommend putting a plan in place with your partners to make it as easy as possible to capture this kind of information. So let's look at an example. We have here high school or GED preparation service. This is defined in that first yellow box. The individual participated in an organized program of study or a GED preparation class to attain secondary school diploma or equivalent. And down below it in the second row from the data guide, we see the accompanying number of times data element. We look over towards the right in the highlighted box, we see the message that a single event shall count as 1. So in other words, each individual GED prep class can be reported in this number of times data element. In addition to that, each meeting outside of class that the service coordinator may have had with the resident to assist with preparing for the exam should also be counted. Again, the more accurate you can be here, the more nuance that will be available to you and to HUD in understanding your program's reach and growth. As this discussion of recording frequent services suggests, we strongly encourage ROS grantees to track data on program activities continually, not just yearly or even quarterly. The best practice is to update your records after each meeting with a ROS participant so that the information is always up to date. If that isn't possible though, you might try updating the data once a week, which is also very valuable. The biggest thing that we're trying to move away from is pulling everything together once a year at the very end of the reporting period. This is important because more frequent data updates give you a chance to capture more of the work you're doing, like the frequent services that we just talked about. That helps give HUD a fuller sense of the reach of your program. Updating data continually also simplifies the reporting process because it avoids the need for a separate tracking system like an Excel spreadsheet, or for entering and uploading a huge amount of data in one bulk session at the end of the period. One of the main reasons this is so important is that many ROS KPIs, key performance indicators, are designed to capture ongoing processes, not just one-time outcomes. For example, if we look at education, we see the KPI receive GED, but we also see the KPI receive education-related services. So we are interested in the outcome of the GED, this one-time event, but we understand that that isn't the whole story. If you track your data continually, not just at the end of the reporting period, then it's easier to tell the story of the progress that you're helping your ROS participants make towards their goals. For example, by frequently receiving education-related services. Even if not every participant achieved the final outcome in a given year, the more complete your data, the more we can see the process and incremental progress that you help your residents achieve. Many grantees are already using case management software to track data continually, but it's also very possible to do this using the online data collection tool, OLDC, which is available for free to all grantees and was previously called Inform. Let's take a look at that workflow. Once you're logged into OLDC, at the beginning of the reporting period, you can create a new report and fill out any basic information, or you can clone your previous report. Then, throughout the year, you can log in to update your report with new data frequently. You can open your ongoing report in edit mode, make any changes or additions to reflect recent program activities or participant outcomes, and then save the report. You can repeat those steps as often as you'd like for the reporting period. Then, at the end of the period, you can check over your data, and when you're ready to go, you can go through the validate, certify, and submit process like you usually would. You only have to do that part once at the end of the period. With that in mind, we also want to draw your attention to a couple upcoming data elements that will be added to OLDC shortly. Currently, not all data elements from the ROS data guide are shown in OLDC. It's because some of these are to be added in the future. For now, for these data elements, we encourage you to track them manually or in case management software like Ask Online or Family Metrics. Here's a list of the elements that we're expecting to be added soon. I'll let you look at that for a minute, but you don't need to memorize it because we will be sharing the recording of this webinar shortly. So with that in mind, we would like to draw your attention to some ROS data quality resources that are available right now. First and foremost is the ROS Data Guide, which is available on HUD Exchange and is the first source of information about each and every data element in the ROS program. We also have recordings of the previous 2 webinars available on HUD Exchange, and the recording of this webinar will be made available shortly. And finally, we're excited to share a new resource, the Data Quality Quick Reference Guide, which offers an introduction to data quality and helpful tips on how you can improve it. This was sent out recently in an email to the ROS mailing list, and it will also be available shortly on HUD Exchange. I'll pause there and ask if there are any questions about the ways to improve data quality that we've covered today. Jennifer, do you see anything in the Q&A?
Hi, Nathan. One question came in regarding slide 13 on recording frequent services. I didn't see an exact question, but it was related to slide 13.
Yeah, I can spend a little bit more time here. So this is an excerpt from the ROS Data Guide, which is, again, this most important resource about data quality. And the first data element in the first row is simply asking whether or not the participant has received this high school or GED preparation service. And the second element is asking how many times that service was received. So if this participant attended a series of 10 classes about GED prep, and then maybe had one subsequent session meeting with the service coordinator about the exam, then you could record the number 11 in the second data element number of times.
Okay, and so the question is, if the participant attends a GED program for 30 days, would you then enter 30 records? And the answer then would be yes.
Yes, every class that you confirm was attended, you can log as one in this section. So 30 confirmed events would be 30. It's true. Any other questions?
Nathan, if I can just add to that. Hello,
Yeah,
everyone.
please,
It's
Trey.
Trey. We know that service coordinators, a service provider may be providing the actual class for the GED exam, but we also know that, service coordinators may meet one-on-one to prepare a resident for that class. So each time you're meeting with that resident, that also can be counted when he's asking about the number of times for GED preparation. So it doesn't just have to be the class itself. It can be anything as well as that will help them in preparing even for the class.
Thank you, Trey. That's helpful.
We have another question. When using the OLDC tool, it asks for counts of certain services. Will the OLDC accumulate each service reported, or do we have to manually update a count?
I think if I understand the question right, it's asking about the process of keeping these numbers up to date. And I believe that you essentially have a row representing each participant, and the value for this data element in that row will be incremented each time. And so I think you will have to go in and increase that number each time you've confirmed that a service event occurs. And in terms of looking across different services, if you were maybe providing several different education services to the same participant, you would update each of those separately. But then in the data dashboard, there are ways to view all education services taken together.
Okay, and jumping back to that slide 13 about recording frequent services, one person is asking, what is the point of recording the class was attended 30 times? Wouldn't it be more relevant that the person had the goal they achieved?
I think that depends on what you're hoping to learn. I think it certainly might be more valuable to you to know that the goal was achieved. But if we were to notice, for example, that someone was attending class 30 times but not ultimately achieving the goal, I think that would still be helpful information, and you might be able to translate that information into a specific change, maybe to increase the efficacy of the training that wasn't actually leading to the credential. Or maybe we would see that participants who were receiving the training 10 times were just as likely to achieve the credential than participants receiving the training 30 times, and we might be able to make that process more efficient.
Right, and I can build on that, Nathan. One of the things the HUD team is looking at, which APTA is really helping us at sort of gathering this information, is for particular types of services, what is the effort that needs to go into an outcome being achieved? And I think here, the number of count, I kind of was, I'll be honest, I probably didn't focus on that in the first few years of starting this, collecting the data in this way. But I think it's particularly important because we do hear questions that come from other folks at HUD, our senior leadership or the administration, that ask, what does it take for an outcome to be achieved? And I think this is a really good example of how you guys can show the effort that it would take. For example, the number of times you would meet with a resident just to get them to achieve one particular outcome.
Thanks, Trey.
Two more questions or comments on this topic. One person is saying they use Family Metrics tool, and that allows you to have a recurrence of certain events so that you don't have to enter the information every time. Somewhat related, someone else is asking if HUD is still agnostic as it relates to the case management software, or does one of them seem to be a best fit with OLDC or data guide? Or I think they mean with reporting their ROS data.
Sure. Well, I will stop short of actually making a recommendation about specific case management software, but I can tell you that what I've observed is that Ask Online and Family Metrics tend to be most proactive about updating their software to match the ROS program and the data guide.
Someone else who is new to ROS is asking, how do you know when to do an assessment or not with a client to determine if they are a participant or a non-participant?
That's a good question. And Trey, maybe you want to speak to this in more detail, but I think that the guidance is to go ahead with the assessment, and that will cause someone to become a participant, having received that intake needs assessment, and will allow you as a service coordinator to start targeting the most valuable services towards them.
Also on the topic of participants, one person is asking that while the goal is to add new participants, asking, is it more important to be able to log more activity with current participants or increasing your participant numbers? Not sure if it's a mutually exclusive goal there.
Right. Trey, maybe you want to speak to the HUD priority there, but I think there's some room for some amount of flexibility based on what you think is going to be the greatest value to your residents.
Sorry, Jennifer, I was trying to read the question. Can you repeat the question or find the question? Can you repeat it for me again?
Certainly. One person is saying they understand there's a goal to add new participants, but they're wondering, is it more important to be able to log more activity with current participants or increasing participant numbers?
Right. I think it's a right. I think Nathan's answer is both. It's sort of the in between of those two. So I'll give like a really good example. There may be developments that a ROS coordinator will be working at, and the number of occupied units stay the same. There's not much transferring or moving of residents from one development to another, and so those folks will pretty much stay the same. And so I'm not probably expecting a lot of new participants because more than likely that those participants are already logged in if they're working with them. The ROS coordinator has worked with them for a number of years. So it would be about activities. However, there are others that may have more new residents coming in, new public housing residents coming into their portfolios and their new development. So in that instance, of course, gaining more participants would be helpful. I will also add that there are some grantees that have lesser participant than others, especially for those that have two or more coordinators. I think in those instances, I would be expecting higher participant counts than those that have one service coordinator.
Thank you, Trey. So there's, I want to acknowledge that several people are reporting that their data is not yet available on the dashboard. We'll get back to that point. I want to cover a couple more questions that have come in. Again, on the service frequency question, someone's asking about an event like Care Closet that provides cleaning supplies that would be relevant to more than one element, including housing retention, service coordination, and transportation if they are delivered. So is it correct that for that one event to be counted in each category?
That's a good question. I think we'd encourage you to choose the category that best describes the event. If there are multiple possibilities, I think rather than logging it 3 times, we'd ask you to choose the best fit. And part of that decision might be based on what's most useful to you in terms of tracking your performance in the future. If it falls into a particular area that you're focusing on maybe scaling up, then knowing that it specifically falls into that category could be valuable.
So if I can build on that, Nathan. So I think I understand the question. And then it'd be also some advice I gave our previous webinar last fall. Yes. So there Self-Sufficiency, for example, you would have I think I used the reference of a job fair, and in that job fair, different sort of events may be happening within that job fair. You may have job development case manager there. You may have arranged for transportation from the development to the actual where the job fairs take place. You may be having some form of service coordination going on there. So different things may be taking place at one event. And I would say, yes, you can record the multiple events that are happening or responses to data elements because of this one event that is happening.
Great. That's really helpful.
Let's do one more question before moving on. Some of these questions we can address after the webinar or possibly, and we might also expand on in webinar 4. But someone is asking if someone, a participant can be in both FSS and ROS programs, and if that is possible, can the needs assessment used for FSS be used for ROS and vice versa rather than doing 2 assessments?
It's another great question. I'm not sure what the rules are about that. Trey, do you know?
Yeah, so we are hoping to come out with some guidance. The HUD response will be that FSS participants should be served by the FSS coordinator, and a ROS participant should be served by the ROS coordinator. However, I understand like the practical nature of that, which is you might have been working with a resident and then they eventually joined the FSS program, but they have built a relationship with the ROS coordinator and they may continue to come to you for A, B, and C. And so what do you do in those instances? We are forming an answer for that and we'll get back to you. It's almost been a year because I may know who may be asking this question, and we will we'll give some better guidance on that.
Thank you, Trey. I think we're going to move on just in the interest of time, but please continue submitting questions and we'll try to revisit as many as we can at the end of the presentation and then, as Jennifer says, during webinar 4. All right, so before we move on to our advanced performance metrics section, we want to hear from you. What is the next step you will take to improve your data quality? There's no right or wrong answer to this. We're just curious, given what we've talked about today and the other resources that are available, whether there's one particular thing that might stand out to you as the first step that you're going to take. So Lauren, if we could turn the chat back on to panelists, go ahead and click that little speech bubble button towards the bottom right and type a message to all panelists and press enter to send it. And Jennifer will share a few of those examples anonymously.
All right, love the first response that came into our question. What is the next step you will take to improve your data quality? And one person responded, increase the green dots.
I love it. That is certainly the goal.
Making sure all fields are filled in. Another respondent has said they've hired a program evaluation coordinator and they've started using family metrics this year. Those are some very concrete steps. Another person is looking at where they are lacking in data quality to examine why they have a low percentage and devise ways to improve through better follow-up and better data entry. Another person reports that the first step is to get use a case management program rather than the spreadsheets they've been using up to this point. Another response is better tracking and reporting frequently to make sure all fields are completed. Another person reports the same thing, making sure all fields are filled in and keeping track to improve them. Logging each session follow-ups no longer than 1 week after the encounter.
Great. These are great to hear. I'm really happy to see all of these steps, and I think we're going to just keep seeing the data quality get better and better, see more and more green dots across the board. So thank you all for your enthusiasm for that. This is really a valuable step. All right, I think we can close the chat again. And I'll move on to the advanced performance metrics that we want to share with you today. Again, throughout today's webinar, we're going to assume some basic familiarity with the dashboard already. We're not going to cover things like how to access the dashboard or how to get around it, but we encourage you to take a look at the recordings of webinars 1 and 2 on the HUD Exchange if you need some more background for what we're going to go through right now. All right, the first type of advanced performance metric we're going to look at is change over time. Understanding change over time is important because it lets you track your program's growth. You can see if specific program changes that you may have made are having the desired results in terms of services provided and participant outcomes. This also lets you identify new needs that might be emerging among your participants that you weren't aware of before. And from there, you can develop some program changes to address them. So I'm going to start on the home page of the dashboard and scroll down to the bottom. Going to click into this outcomes over time link down at the bottom left, and this is under the outcomes in depth section. So once we click that, we're taken to the outcomes over time page, which looks like this one. Now, the way that this is organized is with a row for 4 of the key outcomes that the data dashboard tracks and sets of 4 columns. One column, here represented by the green up arrow, is labeled increased. Then we have the blue circle representing maintained, gray cross representing none, and the orange down arrow representing decreased. What we have here is year-over-year change in a particular outcome. So we take one reporting period and compare it to that same participant's outcome in the previous reporting period. So if we use, as an example, employment status among family participants, we can see that 4% represented by this green bar increased their employment status from the previous reporting period to the next one. 53% had an employment status and maintained it. 41% had no employment in both reporting periods, and 2% decreased from one reporting period to the next. I want to point out that year-over-year comparisons look at the reporting periods that you've selected at the top of the screen. Each reporting period gets compared to the previous one, and that's what's shown in the graphs down below. Note that if you select multiple reporting periods, like we do here with 2017 to 2019, then some participants might be shown in multiple categories. For example, if they improved into one reporting period and then maintained into the next, they'd be shown in both of those categories. Remember that reporting periods go from October 1st to September 30th every year. Now, if we adjust the reporting period at the top of the screen, for example, we remove 2019, then you can see that the outcomes change down below. You can do this if you want to focus on the outcomes that your participants have experienced most recently or farther in the past, as we've done here. Now, let's change that back to 2019. I'm going to move now to the monthly paid earnings section, which is in the tab bar up top right next to this one. But I'll just note before moving on that each of the different metrics in this section, access to care, employment status, activities of daily living, and instrumental activities of daily living, are represented in pretty much the same way. So the example of employment status that we used is pretty transferable to each of these other outcomes that you might want to look at. All right, we're going to move over to monthly paid earnings. Now this screen has a lot going on, and in the top half of the screen, you can learn about monthly earnings in general without particularly considering change over time. And this is the sort of thing that we touched on in the earlier webinars. So I'm not going to go into detail about that part today, but I am going to draw your attention to the section towards the top right, which is focused on telling us how many participants are included in these visuals. On the left, we can see that 22% of this grantee's participants have reported earnings. And further, 10% of this grantee's participants have reported earnings for 2 reporting periods in a row. So because we're looking at change over time, we're comparing consecutive years. And so it means that 10% of the participants from this grantee are the ones whose statuses we're going to be looking at in a moment. So keeping in mind that those are the participants we're considering, I'm going to scroll down to the bottom and draw your attention to this little table. What we have is 2 sections. In the top, we have a section focused on participants with $0 in earnings the previous year. And down below, we have a section focused on participants with earnings greater than 0 in the previous year. Now, this is a distinction that we draw because we do ask, as I've mentioned, that you report earnings of $0 if you know that to be the case. And so what is really happening is three categories: participants whose earnings are unknown, participants whose earnings are known to be $0, and participants whose earnings are known to be more than $0. Let's focus on that third group, which is represented down below, earnings greater than $0 in previous years. Now, here we see those similar icons from the previous outcomes view. We have the up arrow, the circle, and the down arrow. In this case, we're looking at rows instead of columns, but the basic concept is the same. This first row with the up arrow indicates the percent of participants whose earnings increased compared to the previous reporting period. The middle row with the circle indicates those who maintained, in other words, kept their earnings the same. And the bottom row with the down arrow indicates those who decreased their earnings. If we focus on the first row with the up arrow, we can see that 13% of participants in this group increased their earnings. We can see in the next column that 6 people are included in that group. And if we go all the way over to the right, we can see that on average, the people who increased their earnings increased them by the amount of $328. I'm not going to look at every single box in this table, but the principle is really the same throughout. It'll tell you how many people increased, maintained, or decreased their earnings and by how much. We encourage you to spend some time playing around here and get a better understanding of how your earnings, your participants' earnings rather, are changing over time. All right. From there, I'm going to return to the home page of the dashboard using the button at the top right, and I'm going to back to the bottom. Before we move on, I'm just going to note that each page in this outcomes in depth section, all of the ones across the bottom of the screen here, are laid out in a similar way to the monthly paid earnings view we just looked at. We have basic information that's not taken over time in the middle, and at the bottom of each page, we have information about year-over-year changes like the ones we just looked at. So take some time when you can and look at each of these different outcomes, and you'll be able to get a sense of how those different outcomes have changed for your participants over each of the years that you've reported on. Next, I want to look at one other page that can be helpful in tracking change over time, and this one focuses on services. I'm going to go towards the center of the page and click on the Services Over Time link, which is going to take us to the page looking like this. It looks at first like there's a lot going on, but what I want to focus on for now are these blue line graphs. Each of these line graphs in this current view has 3 dots, and each dot in the blue line graphs represents one reporting period. So since you can see at the top, we've selected 2017 through 2019, it means that the leftmost dot for each line graph is going to indicate 2017 performance. The middle will indicate 2018 performance, and the rightmost dot will indicate 2019 performance. We have here a row for each category of services that the dashboard looks at, and we have a column on the left focusing on elderly participants and participants with disabilities, and family participants on the right. Now, I'll draw your attention to the legend on the right, indicating that the blue lines correspond to the grantees values. Now, there are also gray lines that you can use as a point of reference, but I'm going to cover those in just a few minutes. So we'll not spend time there just now, and instead let's focus on the blue lines. Now, up at the top, there is a menu labeled Category Overview right now, and that's because we're looking at the combined services in each service category. But if we want to focus and drill down to a particular area, we can use this menu to do that. So let's change from Category Overview to Health and Wellness. Underneath, we can also change which metric we're looking at. Currently, we're looking at average services per participant, but I'm going to click in there and change it to the percent of participants who received that service at least one time. So now we're in the health and wellness category looking at each health and wellness service individually. And for each of those individual services, we're looking at the percent of the selected grantees participants who received the service at least once. Let's take a look at household skills and life skills services as an example. We can see with the selected grantee that in 2017, 34% of participants received that type of service at least once. In 2018, 37% received it at least once. And in 2019, 46% received it at least once. This shows some steady growth in the number of participants receiving that service each year. That is all I'm going to cover for the moment in this view, but we are going to come back to it in a few minutes. What I would encourage you to do, though, is spend some time taking a look at the different categories of service and the different particular services within each category to get an understanding of how those services has changed over time. That can give you a sense both of your program growth and of how your participants' needs might have changed. So let's pause here. Jennifer, do we have any questions about using the dashboard to look at change over time?
Yes, we have a question, not really a question specific to that. Folks are saying that they have looked at their data to look at the previous year and look at progress over time. No new questions on how to use it that way.
Okay, that sounds good. Well, we'll leave the Q&A open as always, so feel free to reach out with any questions and we can revisit them later on. So before we move away from change over time, we need to hear from you. We're going to ask you to tell us, from a program perspective, how much has your ROS program changed over the past few years? We don't need to focus necessarily on data right now at this point. We're primarily interested in, from a program or a focus or which activities are provided perspective, how much have you changed your program over the past several years? Not at all, a little, somewhat, quite a bit, or not applicable if you're a new grantee. And no one's individual answer will be shared. We'll just share the overall results from everyone together. We'll leave this open for just a minute and everyone can take some time to respond and then the results will be shown together. And if you don't see it, you should be able to expand a little polling category on the right-hand side of your screen, which will have a button for each of these options, and then you can click submit down below. Lauren, why don't we leave this open for about 30 more seconds? Right, and Lauren, if you can share the results. Jennifer, do you want to give us a quick overview of what you see?
Sure thing. So only a small percentage of folks responded that their program has, their ROS program has changed not at all. Only 2% said that. About 1/5 or 21% responded that their program has changed a little bit over the past few years. 38% have responded that somewhat, so that's most of the folks on the call, their program has changed somewhat over the past few years. Another 1/5 or 20% said quite a bit, and 12% said not applicable. They are new grantees.
Great, that is really helpful to hear. And it sounds like almost everyone has had their program change at least somewhat. And we would encourage you to use the dashboard views that we've covered today to see if the changes that you've made in your program are visible in the services that you provide and the outcomes that your participants experience. All right, let's move on to our next advanced performance metric, comparisons to others. Now, this can be important because it's a way to put your program's performance in context. You can understand how you're doing relative to other grantees like you. You can identify relative areas of strength, or maybe you can identify areas where you might ask others about their strategies to improve. We'll start again on the home page of the dashboard. We're going to focus on this first link highlighted now, grantee service comparison. This is one of the more complicated views of the dashboard, so we're going to take some time to walk through this. When you first open the page, you see this large table. What we're essentially seeing right now is a row for each service and a set of columns with different performance metrics. First, point out over at the top right, the health and wellness service category is selected already here. And that's because a minute ago, when we were looking at the other comparison view to see change over time, we selected health and wellness over there. So the dashboard remembers that and has pre-selected health and wellness for us right now. From there, we can see that each row, and here at the top, we're looking at elderly participants and participants with disabilities. We can see that each row represents a particular service within this group. Now, the first set of columns is labeled Your Grant, And these are the performance metrics specifically focused on the current grantee. And this is pretty similar to what we've been looking at almost everywhere else in the dashboard, where the numbers that you see are based on the grantee that you've selected at the top of the dashboard. Now, the first column here is looking at one performance metric, the percent of participants receiving the service at least once. And the second column is looking at the average number of times that each participant receives that service. At the far right, we have two columns representing those two same performance metrics, but these show averages for the entire ROS program. That's every grantee averaged. And if we are interested in seeing how we're doing in context of the entire ROS program, we can make a comparison between the performance metrics in those two sets of columns, the one labeled Your Grant and the one labeled ROS program. To make that easier though, this page in the dashboard has a first column with a little visual indicator to indicate what the comparison shows. So we have a down arrow that's orange to show that the individual grantee's performance was lower than the ROS program average. We have a small gray arrow to indicate that it was about the same. And we have a blue arrow to indicate that the performance of this grantee was higher than the program average. So let's take a look at comparing the particular grantee that we have selected to the ROS program overall. If we use household skills and life skills again, we can see first the blue up arrow to suggest that this grantee is performing above the program average. Then we can see that this grantee is providing services at least once to 39% of participants, whereas the ROS program average is providing those services at least once to only 22% of participants. We can actually change which performance metric is used to generate those visual indicators on the left. We can do that with the menu at the bottom right. So currently it's looking at the percent receiving the service at least once. We can change that if we want to the average number. We'll leave it alone for now though, and move up to look at the comparison cohort. This is one of the things that makes this view especially powerful. Often we're less interested in how a particular grantee is performing relative to the entire ROS program, and we're more interested in how that grantee is performing compared to other grantees that are similar to it. And that could be because other grantees serve a similar population or because they focus on a similar area of need. So this section of the sidebar lets us create a comparison cohort, which is a group of grantees considered similar to us who we want to look at our performance in comparison to. So let's say, since we're looking at health and wellness, that we're specifically interested in other grantees who have selected health and wellness as an area of need that they focus on. I'll choose that in the menu and see down below, the dashboard is telling us that 13% of grantees in the database are used in this comparison group because 13% of grantees are known to have selected health and wellness as an area of need. Now, only relatively recent grants have an area of need as part of the selection process, and so this information is not necessarily known for older grantees. We're looking right now at specifically recent grantees who have selected an area of need. That doesn't mean that there aren't other grantees who also work in this area. It just means that 13% of the grantees in the database are known for sure to have selected that area. So let's take a look at the middle set of columns labeled comparison cohort. This is where the performance metrics are shown for that cohort we just made, composed of grantees who selected health and wellness as a focus area. You see those same two metrics in the first column, percent of participants receiving the service at least once, and in the second column, the average number of times that that service was received per participant. Now, in order to make this comparison easier, I'm going to move down to the bottom right corner, and where it says grantee compared to level of data, I'm going to change from program to cohort. And that will tell the dashboard that now we're interested in comparing ourselves to the comparison cohort instead of to the entire ROS program. We look back up to household skills and life skills, we can see that blue arrow, which now, because we made that change at the bottom right, is telling us that the selected grantee's performance is above the comparison cohort. We can confirm that, in fact, 39%, again, of this grantee's participants received the service at least once, and 30% of the comparison cohort's grantees received the service at least once. So the comparison cohort, it seems, is providing a larger share of participants, with this service than the program overall, which makes sense because the grantees who've selected health and wellness as an area of focus are more likely to provide health and wellness services. But we see that despite that, the grantee that we have selected right now is providing that service more often, even than the average among the cohort that we're comparing them to. This is one of the most flexible views in the dashboard, and we really encourage you to spend some time here exploring. We can't get into everything today, but between the ability to change which set of services you're looking at, the ability to build this custom comparison cohort, and the ability to look at both performance metrics as you need, there is quite a bit of exploring that you can do here to learn about your performance with particular services as compared to grantees like you. Now, I'm going to move to the next view, which is services over time, the one that we were actually looking at just a few minutes ago. So I'm going to click that in the tab bar and see this familiar page that we were looking at very recently. So now is when I want to draw your attention to the other gray lines in addition to the blue line graph representing the selected grantees data. You'll notice that the same comparison cohort that we just selected based on health and wellness as an area of need is already selected here. The dashboard remembers that that's who we're looking at and carries that selection across to the other page. You can also see above a legend that tells us what color of line represents each group. So we have, similar to those sets of columns we had in the previous view, we have one line for grantee, that's the bright blue one. We have one line for the comparison cohort, that's the light gray. And we have one line for the entire Ross program average, which is dark gray. Let's take a look at household skills and life skills services again. We have here the blue line representing the selected grantee. We have the dark gray line representing the entire program average. And only in 2019, the rightmost dot, do we have a light gray dot representing the comparison cohort. The reason we don't have 2017 and 2018 in the light gray is, again, that area of need was only selected as an official part of the grant for recent grantees. So that will be shown for 2019 and beyond. But if you were to create a comparison cohort based on the population focus, you would have as many dots as are shown for everyone else. So here we can see for this grantee, it looks like in 2017 on the left, they were providing household skills services on average fewer times per participant than the Ross program. And their number increased a little bit in 2018, getting closer to the Ross program average, and in 2019 finally exceeded both the Ross program average and the comparison cohort average, which is right below it. This page is a very powerful visual way to see both change over time and comparisons to others in the same place. We hope that you spend some time exploring here. You can't see quite as much data because the lines are so small and sometimes are so close together, but we think that this is a really powerful tool to get a bird's eye view of what's happening, and you can then go look at the other pages we've spent some time with today to get more detailed information. So you might notice a particular trend here that you want to learn more about, and then you could go to those pages we've been spending time with previously and really drill down into the details of how that change has played out. All right, Jennifer, do we have any new questions to answer?
We have one new question related to comparisons, and that is, do the averages in the comparisons include blank fields or groups who do not include that particular area of need in their Ross program?
Yes, I believe to the second part, everyone is included in the program average, the dark gray lines here. So even if a grantee has not selected, say, health and wellness as a focus area, then their numbers are still included in the program average. And that's part of the intent of the comparison cohort, is to be able to filter out those grantees who you're less interested in comparing to. In terms of blank fields, I believe those are not considered here. I think if we don't know how many times a grantee provided a service to a participant, then we don't really make any assumptions.
There's no other questions on comparisons.
Okay.
And we can wrap back to the other questions toward the end.
That sounds good. Well, we're just about to that point. I'm going to turn it back over to everyone in the audience. and ask what you think will be most useful in understanding your performance. What kind of comparisons are you most likely to use? Are you interested in comparing yourself to all Ross grantees, to grantees focusing on the same area of need, maybe to grantees just serving the same populations, or maybe all of the above? Maybe there's something that would be helpful to you in each of those sections. Certainly not a right or a wrong answer to any of this. We're just curious about how you think you might go about putting your own performance in context. This open for just a minute, and we'll share the overall results anonymously. Lauren, we can close this in about 30 seconds, I think. All right.
Okay, so the results are in. In thinking about which comparisons are most helpful in understanding performance, only 5% thought that comparing their grants to all Ross grantees was helpful. 8% think that comparing their grant to grantees focusing on the same areas of need is helpful. 15% view comparing their grant to grantees serving the same populations as helpful. But the large majority, 68%, said all of the above methods are helpful in understanding their performance.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Jennifer. And I'm glad to hear that many of you are thinking that all of those comparisons would be valuable. I think there are different questions that each can answer, and we're happy to see that there's some interest in all of that. And of course, the right comparison to make is just going to depend on the question you're trying to answer at a given time and what your goals are in terms of growth as a program. Okay. Well, that is all that we have planned for the demo of the advanced performance metrics. So we have a healthy amount of time left to answer any questions that are remaining about anything we've talked about so far today. And we can continue to take questions over the Q&A feature of WebEx as you have been doing so far. Again, here's a quick little visual of where that is.
So Nathan, there are a few questions I'm going to go back to that we didn't answer yet.
Great.
One of them regarding is saying that my data quality is below 50% due to the lack of data elements in the OLDC tool. Will this be more accurate using family metrics?
That's a good question. First of all, I believe that it's probably a combination of factors that are at play here, because while there are a number of data elements that are not available in the OLDC yet, it is certainly less than half of the full number of data elements that are available. So while that very much is likely to be a factor, I think there's probably some steps that everyone can take to increase the availability of the data elements that they are reporting on. However, you're absolutely right that your data availability is just not going to be as high as it could be. You're never going to reach 100% until those additional fields are added to OLDC. So currently, because certain case management tools are allowing grantees to report on those data elements that we're still waiting for in OLDC, then it is possible for the data availability to look higher. And this is not something that will be held against you in any way. Certainly, we understand that there's nothing that you are choosing to do to neglect those data elements. We do encourage you to track that information separately right now so that you can add it later once OLDC is updated. But it is a real factor that we're certainly going to be considering when we're taking a look at data quality. And again, you won't be penalized for this. We're just looking at ways to improve within each individual grantee at the moment.
Okay, and a couple folks are asking where they can find previous webinars. I'm putting that link on HUD Exchange into the Q&A responses, and we can share that out again.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Yep.
There was another.
Oh, I was just going to add briefly, you can find those from the Ross program page on HUD Exchange. Right underneath the link to the data dashboard, there's a link to the data dashboard webinars.
Hoping that went out. I'm not sure if folks received that. Okay, and there was an earlier question asking about, this is more of a programmatic question, possibly for Trey. Under what instances do you terminate a ROS program participant?
So you wouldn't, so I would say more so when either that person has agreed to end their receiving any service coordination from the ROS coordinator. For example, they came to the ROS coordinator for a specific need, the need was met, and then they say, I'm done. That can be a way of then ending those services, or at least coordinating those services. Another instance could be that they no longer are a public housing resident. They may move, or they're no longer a resident at the development that the ROS program is serving. And I'm not sure if your question is more so on the term terminate, which is probably at more, that term is used more in the FSS program because of the contracted participation. The ROS program is just built a bit different because there's no contracted participation. Like there's nothing that HUD requires that they're committing themselves to when it comes to the ROS program. We don't really use the term terminate within the ROS program. They just won't be receiving any services from or maybe not be considered a ROS participant anymore.
Thank you, Trey.
Okay, and someone is asking about TAG, T-A-A-G, if that's a good data program to capture data. I use OLDC and it does not capture all my data.
Sure. Yeah, TAAG, I believe, is tracking at a glance. And they are, I think, also able to export data into the format that allows you to upload a file directly to OLDC. And I can't speak to whether it's good or bad in particular. I think it is not known to me to be quite as proactive as Ask Online and Family Metrics are in terms of updates to match changes to the ROS data guide, but it is certainly an option that multiple ROS grantees do use.
Okay, and another person is asking if future webinars will include additional training on using the grant solution system. I think that's a question for you, Trey.
Yes, so we do have, I believe, on the HUD Exchange webpage, we do have webinars on how to use the tool. But yes, this coming summer, probably around June, we'll do our annual How to Report for ROS. We'll be doing that hopefully starting sometime in June.
Thank you, Trey. Consistent with some of the other comments that have come in, someone is reporting they don't see their 2020 data in the dashboard and the report was sent by Family Metrics. Are we still updating the information in the dashboard?
This is helpful to hear. To my knowledge, there aren't any more updates that are underway right now. If you believe that one of your reports is missing from the dashboard, please send us an email with your name and your grant number and which report it is that you're expecting to see but not seeing, and we can take a look at that for you. One possibility is that it was removed for including personally identifiable information about a group of participants, and it's also just possible that it somehow was lost in the transfer from Grant Solutions to us. So do reach out to us over email and we'll get that taken care of.
Yep, and I just wanted to add, if there's someone that, I believe the data pull is from March or April, I forget. Nathan, I want to say it's probably beginning of March, the data pull that we have. So if you submitted anything after March, that's not going to be reflected in the dashboard at this time. So we gave a really good grace period from October to March for folks to submit their data. And then the other part, yeah, that was it. Because I think you also mentioned the PII, which is a pretty common reason why folks may not be seeing their data in the dashboard.
Thanks, Trey.
We have another question about, will HUD take into consideration COVID and understand that their numbers will be lower?
Yes, is the short answer. And I think Trey is planning to speak more to this issue in particular during our next webinar 2 weeks from today.
But I will warn you guys that that probably my response is not so much on that your numbers should be drastically lower. I think at any point, this is the reason for the ROS program and ROS coordinators, especially during this time where residents may have received a loss of employment. There's health-related issues that are going on, or health scares, or doing preventative care. Like, this is the time to really work, especially, but also doing that in a very safe environment. And I think we want to make sure that it's not so much, because I've heard of ROS coordinators completely stopping their ROS programs. I don't think that's what we're trying to message here. It's more so we definitely have an understanding that things have been altered, and the way that you're working, it may be different. And so how do we accommodate that moving forward?
Any other questions, Jennifer?
No new questions coming in.
Well, I will just briefly invite anyone who is called in on the phone and isn't able to use the WebEx Q&A feature. If you would like to ask a question over the air, you can press *3 to raise your hand, and we can unmute you so you can ask your question out loud. And if you're on the computer and you also want to ask out loud, then feel free to raise your hand as well. That's using the little hand button, as you can see on the slide right now. And we will unmute you so you can ask your question live. I'll leave that up for just a minute, and if we see any raised hands, we can answer those.
I think this is also a good time to provide an update on the TA sessions.
Yeah, absolutely. Our one-on-one TA is going to be resuming for booking starting 2 weeks from today after the 4th webinar. Again, these are individual one-on-one sessions where we can talk about specific information regarding your data, your performance in the dashboard, your program, and anything like that that would be too specific to cover during one of the webinars. So we'll be providing a link, the same one as before, to book those sessions starting 2 weeks from today after the 4th webinar.
And if I can
Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to mention that LaTanya is raising her hand when you are ready.
Okay. Before LaTanya goes, I was just going to make one more plug for the ROS mailing list. If you have not signed up, this is the way we communicate with all ROS coordinators. So if you have not signed up for the ROS mailing list, I'm about to send the link for you to sign up. The ROS coordinators should sign up. Their supervisors of the ROS coordinators should sign up. Anyone that may be connected to the ROS program should sign up, just so you have any communications that we share with our grantees.
Yeah, thanks, Trey. Lauren, can we go ahead and unmute LaTanya? She can ask her question.
She's
Good afternoon,
unmuted.
LaTanya. Good afternoon, LaTanya Watson, Law Housing Authority. I just missed the answer about why my grant doesn't show up in the dashboard. He said something and somebody was talking to me and I got caught off guard and I didn't get the response of why my grant doesn't show in the drop-down menu.
Sure. Yeah, it's a good question, and it's helpful to hear that not everyone is seeing their grant. There's a couple of possibilities. One is that if the report was submitted after the data was pulled, which I think, as Trey said, was early March, it might not have been included. Another possibility is if personal information, like maybe somebody's full name, was included, then that's a reason it wouldn't have made it in. And it's also just possible that certain things were lost when the data was copied over from Grant Solutions. So if you can send an email letting us know your grant and the year of data that you're not seeing but expecting to see, then we can take a look and get back to you with a more detailed answer.
And they should submit that email to you, Nathan?
To me is fine. My email address will be on the last slide, and I can read it out then. And Trey, I believe the Ross email is ross-pih@hud.gov. Do I have that right?
Yep.
Great. Any other raised hands? That's *3 if you're called in on the phone.
No other raised hands.
All right. Well, in that case, I think we can wrap up a couple minutes early. First of all, I want to thank you all for joining today. This has been fantastic. I encourage everyone to continue exploring your data in the dashboard, especially since we do have this most recent reporting year just now added. And we also hope you can continue working towards improving your data quality using the tips that we went over today, and also using the Data Quality Quick Reference Guide, which was sent out on the mailing list a couple days ago, and which will shortly be available on HUD Exchange. You're also welcome to review recordings of the past 2 webinars, which are available on HUD Exchange right now, and we'll also be sharing the recording of this webinar in the coming weeks. Finally, if you haven't already, please register for the next webinar, May 13th. That's 2 weeks from today at the same time. And during that next webinar, we're going to be focusing on translating your data into program improvements, including services and participant outcomes. You can register for that at the same page that you used to register for today's webinar. And as we said before, we're going to resume booking one-on-one TA sessions after the next webinar. So keep an eye out for that opportunity coming again soon.
We
that,
did get a few more questions in at the end here, Nathan.
absolutely.
One person is asking, as a new grantee, are there any outcome benchmarks that carry more weight than others for the purpose of receiving new funding at the next grant cycle? Trey?
Good question.
No, not right now. We are being very patient with our grantees. If you have been following our funding, we can't speak to future NOFAs, and I think we just changed the name, NOFOs, Notice of Funding of the Opportunities. We can't speak to the future ones, but if you pay attention to the last few that we've done, we've only been looking at the number of people served, which includes participants and non-participants. Have you submitted your reports on time? And where are you with your expenditures? For example, do you have a significant unexpended balance of your grant? And that's where we've been looking at past performance at. We want to give an opportunity for folks to really work on their reporting, and improving their data quality, and also improving their programs. You know, folks have really good programs, but they may not be showing that through their data. So we want to be patient in providing all of these resources so you guys can do that. And then once that beautiful time comes where we can look at outcomes, we'll be sharing that. But we want to make sure with the foundation is there.
Thanks, Trey. That's really helpful. And I would just encourage also, when you're looking at your data in the dashboard and planning your data quality improvements, it's worth thinking about which areas are priorities for you in terms of the areas of need that you've selected, in terms of the population that you serve, and in terms of what you where you most want to be able to track your own program's growth.
I do want to say this, though, because I think this is really important. Your data and what you submit is what we also share to the Hill, to Congress. And I really want to stress the importance of that, because, you know, when we go, we have to do hearings and briefings to, you know, justify why HUD may need this money or why Congress is going to appropriate the funds. They're always going to ask us data questions. What are the number of people being served? What are their outcomes? Are they receiving jobs? Are they having access to care? These are common questions. And for quite a few years, we weren't able to answer this for Ross, and now we have an opportunity to do that. And I'm not, did the president's budget come out yet? I think maybe not. But anyways, but I think the opportunity to really speak to that is really important. And so while we may not be looking at this on a funding basis for if we're going to award you, I think it's really important because our fund's going to be appropriated for Ross each year, which is a gamble. And so we want to make sure that when we have the opportunity to express the good things that Ross are doing, you guys are doing with your Ross programs, that we can share out all of the information that may be asked of us. And we do get these questions quite often, especially during our budget season.
It's a great point.
We have a couple more questions right before we close here. How should we handle filling out the OLDC if data elements don't apply to us, since blank and 77 count against the average?
This is going to be determined by some of the information in the Ross data guide, which will tell you which data points are required for you. So essentially, if the data point is required, then we are essentially expecting that either you'll be following up to be able to answer it concretely, or you'll be selecting information not collected, which would be, in that case, lowering your availability score. It is an important thing to note, which you bring up, that there are areas of need, service categories that some grantees are not required to report on based on what their focus area is and the population that they serve. And for those, you're still going to be tabulating everything in the dashboard. The data availability view and the other pages will be looking even at the fields that are not required for you. And the purpose of that is to just allow grantees who are reporting, even on the optional fields, to see their work there. We would rather show that for everyone than have it be invisible. But we're certainly going to be taking that into account when we look at your data availability page. And one of the things that I repeat most often in the one-on-one TA sessions is that the goal for any individual grantee is not usually to get everything to 100% in the data availability view. It's to get as close to 100% as you can on categories where you're required to report.
Okay, we have a couple more questions in there, but seeing how we're at the end of the webinar, we can respond to those through following up after the webinar.
Perfect. All right. Well, thanks so much, everyone, for joining us today. I really appreciate your time and your enthusiasm with all of the polls. So take care, and we'll be in touch on the HUD mailing list shortly with the recordings of this webinar. Thank you.